Hello, Bellevue family. I'm sorry that I'm not able to join you in person tonight, but I appreciate the opportunity to continue our study of Ecclesiastes in this virtual format. Tonight, we're going to be looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 5, beginning in verse 8. So we'll look at the second half of Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and then hopefully also get through Ecclesiastes chapter 6. I hope you're able to watch the video. Since no one met in person last week, I hope you're able to watch the video for the first 7 verses of Ecclesiastes 5, and then we're going to pick up in verse 8 tonight. Also, I hope you got a copy of the handout with you that was emailed out earlier today. We're going to work through the text as we also work through the discussion questions that are on page 1 of the handout. So if you've got a Bible with you, I hope you'll open it up, and let's just jump into Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 8. As a reminder, a couple of terms that you need to know if you haven't been with us. There's 2 things that I really want to emphasize. One is when you see the phrase under the sun, that is talking about a life lived into itself without thinking about the hope that we have in God, the hope that we have in Jesus, the hope that we have beyond this life. Solomon the Qoheleth is talking about life into itself. And the second term is that one I just said, Qoheleth, which is the word that is translated preacher or teacher in the text. Which carries with it a bigger idea than just a preacher or a teacher. But that word is in the original Hebrew is meaning one who assembles for the purpose of teaching. And so I will frequently refer to the writer, who I believe to be Solomon, as the Qoheleth. So picking up in verse 8, he says this: "If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter. For the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But this is gain for a land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields." And the question that I have for those 2 verses is, why should we not marvel when we see oppression and perversion of justice and righteousness? And this is actually a topic that the Qoheleth has brought up a couple of times already. In the handout, I have referenced Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 16, where he says, "Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. In the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness." In the next chapter, in chapter 4, verse 1, he says, "I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors, there was power, and there was no one to comfort them." And I think the answer to the question of, why should we not marvel at this, is that this is part of the reality of life when we're just focused, under the sun. Life is not fair. There is oppression. There is injustice. And in the situation that he describes, where you have, one official or one leader that's under another, when you have this struggle for power, those that are underneath, those that are the underdogs, if you will, they tend to get trampled. They tend to be treated unfairly, and that's just part of existing in this world under the sun. But I did want to note, I don't really have this in the question, but I did want to note that he talks about the benefit of having a leader who is committed to the welfare of the land, the welfare of the people. That's in contrast to those that are fighting for power and kind of trampling those underneath them. It's a benefit for the land if there is a king that's committed to their welfare. And so that's something that he points out. Picking up in verse 10, let's keep going. He says, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep." And the question that I have for that in the handout is, why is it vanity to love riches and pursue the accumulation of wealth? And just like the first couple of verses that we read, are kind of a common theme in Ecclesiastes, this is definitely a common theme. It highlights the problem with putting the weight of our lives on the accumulation of things. Because as he says, the more that we accumulate things, the more we say, hey, if I had more money, if I had more things, more material goods, the happier I would be. Well, the more of those things that we acquire, the more that our appetite increases. He says, it increases those who eat them. And that can even be ourselves. Our appetite increases and we have to have more. If we ever play that game that says, I would just be happy if, and we say something that would make us happy or think something that would make us happy, well, if we acquire that thing or we gain that thing, we just want more because that's not enough to satisfy us. It's a never-ending cycle. And this is something that he, as I mentioned, it's a common theme, but he explored in great detail. The writer explored in great detail in chapter 2, the first 11 verses, where he talks about that he went on this quest to surround himself with pleasure. Said another way, he went on this quest to please himself. And so he accumulated things, he built things, he surrounded himself with people, with wives. And at the end of it, he said it was meaningless because none of those things bring satisfaction. As we have more cares in this world, we're going to have an increase in our desires for more of this world. It's never going to be quenched. And as I think about this question about the pursuit of wealth, the pursuit of riches, the love of riches, it reminds me of something that Paul said that I'm sure all of us are familiar with in 1 Timothy chapter 6, where he reminded Timothy that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, because we're pursuing the things that we want in life in the wrong place. We're putting our weight, the weight of our lives on money rather than on God. And so Solomon here emphasizing the futility of doing that. And even so much so that when you have wealth, you still can't sleep because even with a full stomach, the cares that come with wealth and riches will not allow you to sleep. All right, let's look at verse 13. He says, there is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt. He had just talked about accumulating wealth. He says, riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is a father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. And as he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who tolls for the wind? Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and anger. And the question that I have for that section, it says, what do verses 13 through 17 tell us about putting faith and security in our wealth? Again, we've talked about a lot in this class how a lot of this comes down to a choice. God has made us creatures of free will, and we have the free will to choose where we're going to put the weight of our lives. Are we going to put the weight of our lives on Him, on God, because we believe that He is the only way? Or, as human nature would say, as human instinct would say, we're going to put the weight of our lives on what we can do, what we can acquire, what we can attain. So we're going to put our faith in those things. And the problem with that is that whether during this life or at the end of this life, all of that's going to go away. And so if we put our faith in wealth, we put our faith in our security, in our confidence, in our hope, in our wealth, it could be gone tomorrow. And no matter what, we're not going to be able to take it with us when we die. It's just not it's not something that's going to be there that deserves the weight of our lives, that can hold the weight of our lives, that deserves our faith. And it reminds me in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 6, and we've talked about this, these verses a lot in this class already, where Jesus talks about, choosing where you're going to place your treasure. The same thing that we've been talking about, choosing where you're going to put the weight of your lives. But when he talks about putting your treasure here on earth, he says it's, on earth, moth and rust can destroy, thieves can break in and steal. Again, the same thing that Solomon, the Koheleth, is saying, that, things can be gone in an instant. We can lose our riches in a bad venture. They can be gone and we have nothing to give our children. We have nothing with us when we die. So putting faith in those things is vanity. It's foolhardy. All right, the last two verses of chapter 5, or the last three verses of chapter 5. In verse 18, he says this, "Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him. For this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart." So this is kind of the contrast to what he's been talking about in the previous few verses about the vanity of wealth and the pursuit of wealth. Now he's talking about God giving one the ability to enjoy what they have, to enjoy the things that they do, to enjoy their lives. And again, just as all those other things are themes in Ecclesiastes, this is a theme as well. You know, I mentioned earlier how the Qoheleth had fully kind of explored this search for, pleasing yourself, the search for pleasure, and how he had ended that by saying it was all meaningless. Well, in that same chapter, in chapter 2, in verse 24, so on the other end of the chapter, he says this, "There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy." And so the question I have is, what does the Qoheleth again say is good and fitting for one to do, and how can we accomplish this? And the key is that if we want to enjoy life, if we want to enjoy the things that we have, if we want to be happy with who we are, wherever we are, the key is we have to spend our life striving to please God rather than striving to please ourselves. If we strive to please ourselves, our appetite will never be quenched. We'll never be fulfilled. We'll never be satisfied. But if we strive to please God, we can be happy wherever we are. And again, this is where the writer, the Qoheleth, is taking a little peek above the sun to say, if you want to be content, if you want to be happy with where you are in life, you need to strive to please God. And God, to those who strive to please God, God will bless them with the ability to enjoy the things of life. But only if we make him the focus rather than ourselves. All right, we're going to jump into chapter 6, but keeping in mind that when Solomon wrote this, there were no chapters, so there's really not a break in thought here. If you pick up in chapter 6, verse 1, it says this, "There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a grievous evil." And the question I have is, what is the evil which is described in these verses? Why can this man not enjoy his wealth and honor? What would it take for him to find enjoyment? What is the significance of the statement about the stranger? And I've got obviously that's several questions. But I look at this as this is really a contrast to the previous 3 verses, where he talked about the one that God has given the ability to enjoy his labor, to enjoy what he has. And we talked about how, that's because for the one who makes it, their mission in life to please God rather than themselves, God will give us the ability to be content. But here is the opposite of that. It's the one who can't enjoy their toil, that can't enjoy the things of this life. And the reason is because, again, where you put your faith, where you put your treasure. If we choose to put our faith in the things of this world, then we're going to be constantly frustrated by not having enough or not being satisfied. He talks about, the stranger, and the stranger, talks about the stranger enjoying the things that he has. Could be where earlier he had talked about, losing something in a bad venture in chapter 15. Or it could be, as he described back in chapter 2, having to leave something to someone else after you die. In chapter 2 and verse 21, he says, "Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it." And he says, "This also is vanity and a great evil." But one way or another, someone else is going to enjoy the things that they're going to have the things that we have because we can't take it with us. And so with the perspective now back under the sun, he talks about this as being a grievous evil that man can't enjoy. God has not given man the ability to enjoy the things that he has, the things that he does. And all of that is because if we don't put the weight of our lives in the right place, then we will be in that same position. Picking up in verse 3, he says, if a man fathers 100 children, and by the way, he's setting up the scenario, I think most of us know this, but in Hebrew culture, in Jewish culture, it was considered to be a big thing for a father to have many sons. And so here he's talking about, this is kind of an extreme example. He has 100 sons. He's making a point. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity and it goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to the one place. And the question I ask on this is, well, how is, he talks about the stillborn child. How is the stillborn child better than one who cannot enjoy their prosperity? And again, I want to remind you that the focus here is under the sun. This is, talking about the frustration and the vanity of life lived under the sun, and how you can have everything. That's when he talks about having 100 children. He's really saying this is a man who has everything, but he can't enjoy it. He can't enjoy those things. His children don't respect him. They don't give him a burial. And so he says he would be better off that he had never been born. He would be better off than he would never have been born. And the argument is that no matter what you have, we're all going to die. And if we're all going to die and we can't enjoy the things of this life, well, wouldn't it be better if we had never been born? And again, that's the perspective of being under the sun. And the Koheleth has said multiple times already. I've got references in the handout. I won't read them all, but from chapter 2, from chapter 3, from chapter 4, talking about how all, whether you're wise or foolish, whether you're rich or poor, we all face the same fate. We're all going to die. And he's saying here, if you can't enjoy what you have, then it'd be better off if you'd never been born. Again, that's a product of the frustration and the futility of life into itself. Without the hope of God, without the hope of his Son, without the hope of a Savior, it is a frustrating and vain life. Picking up in verse 7, he says, all the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. And the question I have there is, what makes man's labor a meaningless or futile endeavor under the sun? What can it not provide? And, the question here is really, the question here, the two questions, are really very similar to the question that I asked earlier from chapter 5 about, why is the seeking of wealth, the pursuit of accumulating wealth, why is that futility? Why is that misplaced? It's really the same answer, that we'll never be satisfied. If we say that, hey, our happiness is dependent upon what we can acquire and what we can do and what we can surround ourselves with and the situation of our life, then we're going to spend our entire life chasing after those things. And as the writer has said earlier, as we do that, those that consume those things increase. Even ourselves, our appetite continues to increase. And so the imagery here makes sense. If we're toiling to fill our mouth, we'll never be able to keep up. We'll never be able to outfeed our appetite because we're always going to want more. If we are seeking to please ourselves, we're never going to get there. We're never going to achieve that. And again, this is, a common theme in the book of Ecclesiastes. And, one of those things that I think is incredibly freeing to know, it doesn't have to be depressing. It doesn't have to be discouraging, because we can say, I see the writer talking about how the end of that pursuit is vanity, it's meaningless, it's futility. But instead, if I pursue God, if I seek to please Him, I can enjoy where I'm at in life, no matter what's going on. As Paul said in Philippians 4, that I can be content in whatever the situation. I can do all things through Him, through Jesus who gives me strength. Why? Because we're seeking to please Him rather than seeking to please ourselves. Verse 8, he says, "For what advantage has the wise man over a fool? And what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living?" And I asked the question for this one that says, is there any circumstance under the sun which frees us from this vanity of saying, it doesn't matter where we are, no one has the advantage over the other? And the answer is no. Under the sun, there have been places in this book where Solomon has argued that there's an advantage of the wise over the fool, but in others he's argued that they're all facing the same fate. They're all facing death. And so under the sun, there really is no advantage to be gained. Based on our life circumstances, we're all subject to the futility. We're all subject to life repeating itself. And so the message here, again, continuing that if our focus is in the wrong place, we're going to feel the weight of that frustration. We're going to feel the weight of that futility, the discouragement of that. And so, the only way to escape that vanity is to look above the sun, to look to God, to put our hope in Him rather than in ourselves. That's the only way we can escape the vanity of life. Verse 9, and I love this verse. Verse 9 says this, "Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind." And the question I simply have there is, what advice does the Qoheleth give for dealing with this futility? And you may not catch it right away because the wording is not wording that we would use. But when he says, better is the sight of the eyes, I believe what he's saying is, be content with what you see, or be content with what you have, rather than, the wandering of your endless appetite. Instead, be content with what you have. And I would go back to what I just said before, and that is the only way to be content with what you have is to strive to please God rather than yourself. And he says, then we can be content with what our eyes see, what we have in front of us. And so I love that verse. Be content with what you see. Better is the sight of the eyes, what we have right now, than what we're going to chase after, what we're going to try to fill our appetite, which will never be filled. All right, verses 10 and 11. He says, "Whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is, and that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity. And what is the advantage of man?" And the question that I have here is, who knows everything about man? Who does the word stronger refer to? Why should we limit our words before the one who is stronger, or before God? And so in the questions, I've kind of answered the question about, who is he referencing when he talks about the one stronger? I think he's talking about God. That God knows everything. God is in control. And he emphasizes that we should limit our words, The more words, the more vanity. Which, if we go back to the beginning of chapter 5 that we looked at last week, the writer said the same thing. He says, "Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on the earth. Therefore, let your words be few." We have to remember that God is in control. God knows everything. God is all-powerful. And human nature is to believe that we know everything. We have it all figured out. And when we want to speak first, it's an indication that we think we have it figured out. But we have to remember that, when we are in the presence of the Almighty God, that we have to be listening to what He has to say rather than pretending like we have it all figured out. We have to listen because we are imperfect, finite human beings in the presence of the Almighty, infinite God who created the universe by what He spoke. And we have to remember that. We have to remember that God is in control. The last verse, and then the lesson will be yours. He says, "My son," verse 12, "My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books, there is no end." And I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong verse off my notes. I started reading that going, that's not right. Let's actually pick up in chapter 6, verse 12. He says, for who knows what is good for a man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? And again, this is, again, he takes these little peaks above the sun talking about God, but this is back squarely under the sun. And the question that I have is what is man unable to determine about his life? And if our focus is under the sun, meaning we are in the, we are fully entrenched in this life and the cares of this world, not thinking about God, not thinking about eternity, not thinking about hope, then how are we going to know what's good? How are we going to know what the good things are without regard for the Creator? How are we going to know the things that are good? How are we going to know what's going to come after us? How are we going to know what the future is? Those are things that we cannot know within this life. We can't know those things. But the contrast to that is, if we're striving to please God, if we're, yielding our life to Him, then we can know which things are good because He has told us what is good. And we can be confident of our future because He has given us the gift of eternal life. And so we can be confident of the future. But here he's emphasizing that under the sun, one, life is brief, but it passes like a shadow. And two, that, without the Creator, without the one who is stronger that we are subject to, we're not going to know what's good. We're not going to know what comes after us. So I hope that you will spend some time thinking about these things, maybe going back and rereading chapters 5 and 6. I hope that this has been a beneficial study for you. Hope everybody has a fantastic rest of the night, a fantastic rest of the week. And thank you for bearing with me through this video tonight.